It's a good day today. I hope today is as good for you as it is for me. And I hope it's as good for everybody you cherish as it is bad for Dragon Age Veilguard fans who are just now realizing that pretty much nobody bought their dog shit game. Now, I played Dragon Age Veilguard. I thought it had potential. I didn't dislike the combat at all. I played on the hardest difficulty. I figured out a nice build where I just got my resistances and my armor as high as it went, and then I put on a suit of armor that turned all of those resistances into extra damage. And, just stacked my defensive stats as high as they could and turned them into damage, because that's what warriors do. It was quite fun. I was pretty much indestructible, and most things died pretty quickly, even on the highest of difficulties. However, most people who played the game didn't have that experience. They found many of the higher level bosses to be damage sponges that just weren't fun to kill. And I can completely understand that. I absolutely feel as though a lot of the builds kind of turned the fights into slogfests. Now, I do enjoy the type of gameplay that Veilguard put out, and I think that if the writing of Veilguard had been as good as the writing of, say, Origins, or maybe even Dragon Age 2, maybe Inquisition, it would have been a really good game. I think that if they were to remake Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2, and Dragon Age Inquisition with the gameplay of Veilguard, it would be really good. They wouldn't have to do this if they just, I don't know, gave us a campaign maker for Veilguard where we could make our own thing. Just give us the assets and we can make it, and just let us make the content, and all you have to do is reap the rewards. It would be really simple. Unfortunately, EA, despite claiming to want to make money, they seem allergic to the idea of letting people make the content for them so that they can make the money. And so it would appear that I believe the number that's being floated around is about 1.5 million players total, not copies sold, players. Now, why is that important? It means that the number of players is most likely the number of copies sold is most likely smaller than the number of players. This means a couple of things, right? It means that considering the expectation was that it would sell at least 3 million copies in the first few months, which would be completely reasonable considering Inquisition did that. Actually, I think Inquisition did more than that, but still. It failed miserably in regards to expectations. It also failed miserably with regards to recovering the investment, both in development and advertisement. And honestly, the game kind of just failed in general with regards to expectations. So, Yellow Flash is going to be talking about this situation, and we're just going to be sitting back, relaxing, and watching as he makes fun of the shills. I think an ad was trying to play there. An ad did not play there.
So, I'm non binary.
Now, if you're going down to the comments to say, non-binary people are stupid, that's not why the game failed, right? We could have absolutely had a non-binary character. Absolutely. However, the concept of non-binary people is something that pretty much exists exclusively in upper middle class people. Why? Because people in situations of struggle tend to not worry about that so much. However, it does exist all over the place. There are people who don't feel comfortable as men or as women, even in struggling countries. So the idea of a non-binary person in Dragon Age is not, I repeat, it's not out of the realm of possibility. However, in the setting of Dragon Age, the words plural. Non-binary, completely ridiculous. Why would they ever refer to it as that, considering they don't have the terminology binary? They don't speak that way. They don't understand the concept of binary gender. They probably don't even have the concept of gender. They have the concept of sex, male and female, man and woman. And I think that this could have been much better written if it had been written by somebody who gave one singular fuck about the setting of Dragon Age. Which I think if you kept up with the development of Veilguard, you would know the developers didn't give a shit about Dragon Age. They weren't Dragon Age fans. They knew nothing about Dragon Age. Most of them had never even played a previous Dragon Age game, which is essential if you're going to make a sequel, and doubly so if you're going to make a climax to a series. But let's continue.
What does that mean?
Realistic response. What does that mean? What is a what do you mean a binary? Two things? It's like you're not one of two things? What does that refer to?
It means I don't feel like a man or a woman.
Then what do you feel like?
Well, Tosh is...
Because it's like... And this is something that a lot of people do struggle with when they talk to non-binary people. What do you feel like? Right? Because the idea of, I don't feel like this or that, doesn't really make sense in the brain of a lot of people if you don't also have something that you feel like. That's why it's a common question. And the response, I just told you, non-binary, doesn't really make sense because that doesn't answer the question of, what do you feel like? Right? It answers the question, what don't you feel like? And when you're trying to understand someone, it's kind of important to understand what they're actually trying to get at the end. Now, a lot of people who are non-binary kind of just want to be referred to as they, them. Which, fair enough, right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, it's quite strange when you see these people getting angry and offended and upset, as Tash does, when somebody who has never encountered something like this situation is exposed to it for the first time and asks genuinely very understandable questions.
Pounding that snake's nose. She's still holding the ruby in her other hand. Maker's panties. I was so proud.
Oh,
Ah, shit. They're still holding it. Sorry.
What are you doing?
Pulling a barb.
Oh.
This is also a bit of a weird scene, right? Because it's an unnecessary cutscene. It's a cutscene whose only purpose is to look the player directly in the eye and tell them, hey, if you misgender somebody, you have to show proper deference and get down on the ground and do some form of penance. And it's a little on the nose, and it's very poorly written.
Okay.
a barv.
Tradition in the Lords of Fortune from one of our old members. Among your crew, when...
But let's skip past these, because we're not just here for the worst cutscenes in Veilguard that everybody's seen multiple times, and that even people who haven't played the game can talk about. We're here to see what everybody else is saying about it.
What a story, Mark.
Surprise! The game that had that stuff in it failed. Underperformed by 50%.
And the reason I chose Yellow Flash is because I'm fairly certain he's not a Dragon Age fan. And I did want to choose somebody who would say stuff like, surprise! The game that had that stuff in it failed. Because every single Dragon Age game had that stuff in it. Surprise! The others didn't, right? Dragon Age Origins had all of that stuff as well. It had, same-sex relationships. Dragon Age 2, I'm pretty sure, had transsexual characters. Dragon Age Inquisition even included Krem, who was a transsexual character, who is in the Inquisition, and you can talk to them, you can ask questions. Now, that scene was for some reason very poorly received because you play as a character who has never encountered somebody like that. Because, shocker, 90% of people do not know any trans people. They just don't. There's not enough trans people in the world, especially not in Europe, and especially not in Asia and Africa, for everybody to have met one. Now, in America, they are overrepresented. About 5% of the general population is LGBT. Actually, 5 to 10%, whereas elsewhere in the world, it's 1 to 5%. It's a big difference, especially when you amplify that to a larger number. But at the same time, it's very strange to see the people that are being, I use the word pander to here, but not in a negative sense. They're being pandered to in the sense that they are being included in the setting, and then they are being exposed to a larger audience that might have no contact with them, and so it makes sense to play as a character who does not know. And the character who doesn't know, but wants to understand, will ask questions such as, hey, how long have you known this? When did you realize this? How does it feel to, go through reality, through our world with this struggle that you go through, where you want to be a man, you want to present as a man, and you do present as a man, but some people might see you as a woman because that's what you were born as. What is this like? Is there anything I can do to make you more comfortable while you're here? It's like, what can others do? What are you doing? Like, questions, right? That you would normally ask. And when it is written into the narrative that the person that is abnormal, because I'm not saying it's anything wrong. I'm just saying it is abnormal, because if you're 1% of the population, you are an abnormality, no matter what that means. You could be 1% of the population in wealth, you're abnormal. So when the person who is abnormal becomes aggressive once that abnormality is questioned, not from a place of hostility, but from a place of understanding, that person becomes somebody you no longer want to understand, and you just consider an attention seeker, and you no longer really care about them. You no longer really care about what they're going through, right? But let's continue.
What do we try to tell you? Nobody wants to play those kinds of games. And all of the video game journalist sites are forced to report it after all of them gave the game glowing reviews.
I do think Jason Schreier saying top the charts with a number that was not in fact topping the charts is very funny to me. Like, it was losing to Kingdom Come Deliverance, which at this point was like, what, a 4-year-old game or something?
Best fantasy game ever. Isn't that what you've always wanted in your medieval?
Like, I will say it had the best numbers of any Dragon Age game, but it also had the best publicity. And in fact, let's see something. What are the charts of Veilguard right now? It's still at 4,000. It went up, likely because of the new patch that came out. Before the patch, it was at about 4,000. Okay. It's not terrible.
Evil fantasy.
It didn't sell enough for how much the investment that was put into it was, but it's not bad. It's not horrible.
Games where you hunt dragons and use magic. You didn't want to explore gender ideology? What, you say you don't want that in your game? Well,
and again, this is the problem, right? You're in a game where everything is falling apart, reality is literally coming to an end as you know it, and then your character is in a group where it seems as though one person is more concerned with their gender ideology and this coming into themselves situation that has nothing to do with the main story whatsoever. Everybody else is kind of working towards it, but all the codex entries, for example, which I'm pretty sure Yellow Flash Eater isn't going to talk about at all, but all of the codex entries regarding the Veilguard, as you apparently call yourselves, which really it's Varric calling you that, and later you find out that it's not even really Varric calling you that. It's all about like these extracurricular activities that have nothing to do with the actual story. It's like, what do you mean you have the free time to start a book club? Since fucking when? How would you even have the time for doing that? We are constantly on missions. We're constantly fighting. We're constantly trying to save the day. How do you have the time to do that? The game seems to take place over the course of like 1, maybe 2 weeks because you're teleporting everywhere, right? There is no travel time. You're not on like a boat. You're not on like a ship that's going from point A to point B, and then that time frame is shortened for the player's convenience. That's not the case. You're in a hidden location in the realm of spirits, and then you're literally teleporting from that location to the place you want to go. There's no travel time. Everything happens within a week, maybe 2. How on earth would there ever be the time for you to start any extracurricular activities? How on earth would there be the time for a romance? How on earth would there be the time for you to get to know each other? It makes no sense. It's completely ridiculous. And that is part of the reason why Veilguard is such a failure. Because it is, at the end of the day, very poorly written. I don't think we're going to talk about it, Mr. Yellow Flash anymore. I think we're just going to sit here and talk. Just the two of us, just you and me. Veilguard failed. Veilguard failed very hard. It failed not because of the diversity issue, because the diversity issue was present in every other Dragon Age game. Dragon Age Origins made the news because of the same-sex relationship with Zephyrin. My boy was a drama queen from the start, starting it and living it. Dragon Age 2, same thing with, I believe, Anders. Inquisition, same thing with Krem. Veilguard kinda had the same thing with Tash, except rather than making it as, hey look, this is a good representation of this, this is a character who is vibrant, is alive, they have reason for being the way that they are. Instead, we got non-binary Oghren. We got a mean-spirited, rude, ill-mannered, little petty piece of shit that you can't have a real conversation with, because no matter how much you try, she meets every single attempt at conversation with her with hostility. The first time you meet her, you ask, oh hey, I notice you have the little arm ropes that the Kunari wear. Do you follow the Kun? And she says, no, I wear what I want. You can't tell me who I am. How was that a proportional response? How was that appropriate? How on earth are we supposed to go, oh, this is somebody that I want in my group? I wouldn't want Tash in my group at all. I think the moment that she says that, and then the next conversation we go, hey, if you got this whole thing under control and you don't want us here, why did you ask for us to be here? And she says, I didn't ask for you to be here. I would have turned my freaky ass around and walked away. I would have left her there for her own devices, and then she would have gotten to the end of that mission, and she would have been ripped apart by the Kunari, and that would be the end of Tash. That would have been it. And you know what? If you had had that option to just walk away and let her fight the Kunari on her own and let her get killed on her own, I think the game would have been a lot better. Because then the player has a choice. And then the good decision matters more. That's why in Origins it was so good that in the first location that you go to after the chapter 1 where everything goes wrong, as soon as something appears in front of you, you're given a choice. Do you want to engage with this? Do you not want to engage with this? Very simple. right? When you're in Lothering, there's 2 companions that you can encounter. Did you know a lot of people leave Lothering without recruiting those 2 companions? Because they don't know they're there. And they miss out on that. And you know what that does? That makes them all the more valuable. Because the next time you play through the game, and yes, a lot of people play through Origins multiple times because the expansiveness of the story, how much it can change, both in the epilogue and in the playthrough itself, matters. And so you can play through the game multiple times because, first of all, it's very well written, and second of all, every interaction you have has multiple different ways that it can go. And so the game, despite only being about 20, maybe 30 hours long, you can play it again and again and again and again and again and again. And you can get all of these different playthroughs. One of the main quest lines has 4 different endings, each of which gives you different outcomes. For the epilogue and for the playthrough itself. The same thing goes for... Actually, I was going to say for some of the others, but no. Every single main quest has at least 4 different outcomes. Some have... I think up to 8. 8 different outcomes for a final mission. That's impressive, right? Meanwhile, Veilguard has 1, maybe 2 major decisions that you can make throughout the entire game. Now, they're major decisions. They do make a change in the experience, but do they really change the overall progression of the game? No, they don't. Now, Dragon Age 2 also didn't have much difference in its playthroughs, but it didn't try to. It was a much smaller experience. It was much more guided. It was the story of Hawke. The only real major difference in choices is, just a few main missions things. But Inquisition still tried to do something. It still tried to respect all of those little decisions that you made, and it tried to pay homage to them. Veilguard didn't. Veilguard pretended that it would have 3 major decisions that would matter, and then out of those 3 major decisions, 1 mattered. And it was a binary choice. Is your Inquisitor from Dragon Age Inquisition romancing Solus? Or not? And even that didn't really matter all that much. Veilguard failed. Veilguard failed in every single aspect of a Dragon Age game. Every single one. Truly, it was quite pathetic. It made a terrible showing of everything that Dragon Age wants to do. Dragon Age wants to give you a good, epic story of you saving the world. And Veilguard failed at doing that, because the story wasn't good. Dragon Age wants to give you good companions that you can empathize with, that you can understand, and that you can feel them grow throughout the story. And it failed at doing that. Because of all of the companions that you get in Dragon Age Veilguard, 1 is interesting, and it's Emmerich. Davron is basically only there because of Hassan. His own story, and even the devs admit this, his own story is completely meaningless. It's all about Hassan. Balara? She's barely an expert. She doesn't know half the things she's doing. She lucks out through almost all of her scientific accomplishments, and she more than exemplifies this throughout the game. And then at the end, you're given a ridiculous choice regarding whether or not to destroy this source of information that really has no reason to be destroyed. Nev is also kind of just there. She's a detective who never does any detective work. She's more of a vigilante than anything. Lucanus was a little interesting, but they failed with making him come off as an actual Antivan. They made him a Spaniard who was obsessed with coffee. That's about it. And then they gave him Spite, which would have been interesting if they had made Spite an actual evil influence on him. But they didn't want to do that. They instead wanted him to be just a pet, a cute little thing. And it took all the teeth out of that. I'm not even going to talk about Harding, because in my opinion, she shouldn't have even been in the game. Her role should have been Sandals, who was set up from Origins to be the dwarf mage. Instead, we get Harding. I cannot stress enough, she should not have been in the game. She should not have been in the game. I don't care what you think, you're wrong if you disagree. And then there's Tash, who we've already talked about at length. Did I miss anyone? Emmerich, Nev, Balara, Davrin, Tash, Harding, and Lucanus. Yeah, no, I didn't miss anyone. But see, each one of them is so bland that it fails. And then the last thing that Dragon Age tries to do, it tries to show rather than tell that, you know, a diverse cast is not a negative. Because it isn't. In Dragon Age Origins, we had a diverse cast. We did. We had people from all different walks of life. We had a golem. We had a dog. We had a sheltered mage who had never lived outside the tower, but had wisdom, a lot of wisdom to give. And then we had an outcast mage who had lived a life of ruthlessness, who only lived through being a monster. And you get to show her that that's not a requirement anymore. We had a very sheltered warrior who kind of didn't know that much about the world, but he had to toughen up because, guess what? That warrior might become king. And so he needs to actually become someone who can be king. We had a drunk left by his wife who, he's just a dreg of society, a shadow of himself. And we had a soldier who was bred for war and lived for war and never even doubted himself at any moment. And yet you can show him a new path of life. Not through a single decision at the end of his quest chain, but through continuous conversation, continuous exposure to this new culture. You can change his way of thinking. And the same goes for Inquisition, to some extent, honestly, not as much as Origins. And Dragon Age 2, again, not to the same extent, but Dragon Age 2 did not have the time that Origins did. Inquisition did. What I'm trying to get at here is Veilguard is a pathetic attempt at wearing the face of Dragon Age by people who could not care less about the franchise and who could not care less about you, the player. Or me, the old fan. They don't care. They want your money. They don't deserve your money. They put out a terrible product. And I sincerely hope that everybody involved with the creation of that product never makes another video game again. Unless, of course, their entire philosophy of making video games changes. With all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed. I know I did. I'm supping upon the tears of Veilguard. But leave a like, leave a dislike, leave a comment, subscribe. Do all of that good stuff. Do all of that good stuff. I'll see you all again next time. Have a good one. Cheers. I'm leaving all that in. I don't even give a fuck.